this is part 2 of Telltale's video on our top 5 banned books picks, celebrating Banned Books Week. If you haven't seen part 1, check out our channel. It's in there. If you missed it, go back and watch it. And now on with the video.
But yeah, so that's mine. What's yours?
Okay, my number 3. My number 3, believe it or not, I looked up a list of banned books online. And can you believe this? The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah!
It's banned. For what?
Witchcraft. From a Christian author. An openly Christian author.
Okay.
That's what I think is funny. I think that's hilarious. People are like, oh, there's witchcraft in this. We gotta ban it.
Obviously, the bans have been
What?
wildly unsuccessful because this is probably the most famous, most important fantasy book of the last 100 years.
Yeah.
And everybody's reading it.
Yeah.
And of course, it's one of my favorites. But when I saw this on the list, I just sat back and went, "What the heck?
Yeah.
Who would ban that? You know,
Witchcraft.
Elves and trolls or no, there's no trolls in this. What are they?
There were trolls.
Were there?
Yeah.
Okay,
They
it's
used
been a
them.
while.
They came from Mordor. They existed. Orcs.
Okay. Orcs.
Trolls.
That's what I was trying to think of. It's the orcs.
Goblins.
You know, yeah,
The
goblins. You know, flying wraiths and magic rings, and it's like, you know, it's just total unreality. You can't. There's just nothing. You know, but I mean, it's not even like real. There's no connection to real world witchcraft here.
No, it's entirely
just totally
fantasized.
fantasy. It's not even a real world. Middle Earth. What is that? You know, it's nothing real.
Yeah.
It's total fantasy, totally disconnected from reality. And so how is it harming anybody?
I often suspected. So Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were both really good friends, and C.S. Lewis was also openly religious.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And oddly enough, people didn't ban or try to ban The Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe. But I think the difference was that C.S. Lewis fully believed that all storytelling should be allegorical to the gospel, to the Christian narrative, Judeo-Christian narrative, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Tolkien was very adamant when he wrote Lord of the Rings that he was trying to make an Anglo-Saxon myth because he did not feel that there were enough of them since, you know, King Arthur.
Yeah.
So I think that's what made it so controversial, is that there was, you know, the church could rally around C.S. Lewis because of all his theological work, and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was meant to be an allegory for the gospel and blah, blah, blah. But Tolkien was very adamant about, this is entirely a work of fiction. I want to make a good fantasy and myth. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of it was him being so open about it not being allegorical to his faith that made it more controversial. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he was very adamant about it in his notes, a lot of interviews. I think he got booed once out of a lecture because he was talking about the themes of his story, and people were upset that it wasn't meant to be allegorical.
Oh boy.
I don't know if it was him or another author. I may not be correct on that. But it was such a controversial thing at the time, especially with the height of, you know, religious stuff after World War II.
Yeah.
And having to deal with people, you know, trying to come to terms with deaths and things like that. So I suspect that's why it was so adamantly banned, but I cannot confirm, but I will not stand down from that opinion.
Yeah. But we love our myths. We know they're not real. Mm-hmm. We know they're totally disconnected from the real world, and we want it. We love it. We read it. Here in America, we have Superman and Batman and Spider-Man and all those, you know, the Fantastic Four and Justice League and the X-Men, and we know that's not reality. We know it's totally made up, that there's nothing remotely true about any of it, but we still spend so much money on that stuff because we love it.
Yeah.
We want it. And Tolkien's Lord of the Rings falls into that category. It's not real. We all know it isn't real, but we still love, for few hours a day to escape into that other world that has nothing to do with going to work and coming home and making supper and paying the bills, you know.
It's just another good versus evil story, like most stories are. Like, they did the same thing to Harry Potter, where they wanted to ban Harry Potter because it's witchcraft. I'm like, yeah, it's not true witchcraft, though. Like, when you think about it, like, it's a fantasy world. Rowling just built a myth. That's all it was.
What is it? They take this train and it goes through some kind of portal into this. It's somewhere on Earth still, but nobody can see it. And I mean, who's going to buy that as reality?
Exactly. It was a very well thought and well figured out myth, because she does bring other myths into. And I think Tolkien kind of does the same thing. Like, he's bringing these other mythical elements, like dragons and, you know, things that people are familiar with, but giving them an entirely different origin. And I think it's just beautifully done. But yeah, there was a lot of controversy at the time about having the, you know, authors who were professing believers in Christ kind of going into these mythologies that were, you know, surrounded by magic, and it wasn't like have you read the Silmarillion? Gosh. It's, you know, it's kind of interesting how he built this whole myth. I was like, it's fantastic, and it's amazing that it's not allegorical, because there are a lot of things people could relate, but that wasn't his intention. There's only like, 26 basic storylines that you can have in any given story. It just so happens the Bible has all, if not most of them. Yeah. So, I mean, you can't make a myth without having these universal themes going through them and having these same basic storylines. Like, you just can't do it. So, magic or not, as long as you realize it's a myth.
And it's just fun to have something that's just not real, like Star Wars. It's a fun movie.
It's so, like, outside of us and our box that we live in, and that is reality.
Yeah, it's not even in our galaxy. It's somewhere. Who knows?
It's well done.
Who knows
too.
when? You know,
that's what I think is probably the most aggravating thing for people who are trying to ban these books. Is most of them are really well written, and they're so good. Like, it's hard to fight it, because they do become classics. So they do become, like, popularized by their controversy and the fact that they're well written. Yeah. So yeah, Lord of the Rings. That one blew me away too. Actually, I wanted to add it to my list, but I have so many things that I read before I actually read Lord of the Rings that just took a place in my heart.
Okay. Plus, so you're number 3 then?
My number 3, Great Gatsby.
Another one I've never read.
Another one about party culture.
Which is why it's banned?
Kind of. Yeah, lots of it's bootlegging and a lot of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. A lot of murder.
It's never been banned in Wisconsin, obviously.
No. I don't know. There's murder and, manslaughter and cheating on each other's wives and stealing other people's wives. It's very, kind of like the Iliad. Except instead of war, it was just blackmail and personal espionage. So,
capitalist war.
Oh, kind of, yeah, actually. Very, very big on that. But, this book was very, basically, Gatsby is this very mysterious, wealthy man. And he's in love with the girl across the lake who's married to a very famous polo player. I think he was a polo player. Might have gotten that from the movie, maybe not from the book. But he's, you know, they live in these wealthy things, and he and this girl Daisy used to have a fling, and it just so happens Daisy's cousin is renting Gatsby's cottage, his little guest house, lakeside cottage. So they kind of like get to know each other as neighbors, and he introduces him again to Daisy as a favor. Next thing you know, Daisy, a married woman, is having an affair with Gatsby, but her husband's been off sleeping with who knows what, and the cousin knows because he got invited to one of the parties and saw, you know, the whole spiel. So a lot of it is just, you know, jealous guys wanting it all and trying to murder each other, basically. Because you get angry husbands, and, you know, Gatsby himself is not all that he appears to be. He kind of assumes an estate, and he was not born into wealth. He's been fueling it in less than ideal means, mostly through bootlegging and parties and just connections. So it's a really good book for the fact that it's talks about what human success actually is. Because Gatsby ends up, spoiler alert, dying in the end. Nobody shows up to his funeral but the guy who rents from him and one other dude. But he used to throw these lavish parties with hundreds of people who claim to be his friends, but the second tragedy strikes, no one's there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a really, I think, good... Part of the reason it's controversial is because it does portray wealth and capitalism as kind of a double-edged sword, and in fact a more negative than positive.
Mm-hmm.
Also, of course, drug use, adultery, sex, drugs, rock and roll.
Yeah,
that's basically what banned this book. That party culture sort of thing, but it is very controversial, I think, for understanding the existential meaning of success.
Yeah.
For an individual, so. And it's one of my favorites. I love F. Scott Fitzgerald. I wanted to get a t-shirt that says, I would F. Scott Fitzgerald. They're out there! I love them! Because he is such a great writer. He really has a strong sense of mixing poetry with prose.
Mm-hmm.
And he really is a master storyteller. And as you can see, it's not a very long book. It's a very quick read.
No, I always thought it was thicker.
Yeah, but it's very detailed for how short it is.
Okay.
You get really good perspectives on each character and really good world building, and you get really good character development.
It's
I don't know how he does it in so few words.
But a lot of writers today and publishers can learn from that. That you don't have to have a thousand page monstrosity in order to tell a good story.
Yeah, I'd say he's one of my favorite authors.
And you don't have to have sequels. There's no sequels. There's no series. It's just one book.
Yep, and all his books are about this.
Yeah.
Very concise, but very poetic. You get a really strong story without as many words. So I feel like F. Scott Fitzgerald is a really great author. This book is one of my favorites in particular. It has very beautiful imagery with its 1950s lavish lifestyle.
Yeah.
In fact, my parents used to live in the part of New York that Gatsby took place in, so it was kind of fun because they've been on the same lake and seen those big mansions and houses and stuff, and they said, yeah, when you see those estates, they are... You understand the Great Gatsby better. Mm-hmm. So then we went on Google Maps, and it was fun. Because we tried to find all these, like, houses that were in that area. And like
looking into people's backyards.
Kind of, like, that's the fun thing about Google Maps is that you can't... A lot of them are actually, like, they have really long driveways, so you can't see. But the ones you can see, like, if you go, like, the Hamptons... Mm-hmm. Just Google through the Hamptons. Take a drive. Some of those houses, you're like... They have to have a staff to run that thing. It's like as big as a manufacturing building. Like, they're huge. Yeah. So, yeah, really interesting. Mm-hmm. Interesting literature. And it was kind of fun to have that connection because my parents used to live out in New York. Okay. So I was born there. So it's kind of cool to have that connection and be like, oh my goodness, like these places really exist. Like these were written based off of actual locations, which I think is also really fun.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess it's my turn.
Yeah.
My number 4 is a very interesting book it's going through kind of a renaissance right now, I've noticed. A lot of people are talking about it. I read it back in the 1980s. I got a hold of a paperback copy that came out. It's We by, I'm murdering this name, Yevgeny Zamyatin? Probably not how you say it.
I've never even heard of it.
It's a dystopia that was written in the Soviet Union in the 1920s, which talks about, basically characterizes totalitarian states as evil. Oh. So this guy was really taking a big risk writing and trying to publish this novel living in a totalitarian state. And basically...
You're asking to get blacklisted. So
before Brave New World, before 1984, this guy in the 1920s wrote We. It takes place in the near future in a totalitarian society, and my memory of the exact details is rusty, but it blew me away. It's a great book. And of course it's banned because everybody who wants to start a totalitarian state or rule other people doesn't like people saying, people putting out warnings that this is a bad thing and watch out for these people. So, and of course it was banned in the Soviet Union for a very long time, but copies showed up in the West, so it got published in the West, because of course we wanted to say, Soviet Union, this guy's pointing you out as being so bad. But even in the West, it didn't get published a whole lot, because it just is, it's coming from a very different culture, from a very different time. It wasn't published in the science fiction magazine, so it wasn't part of the science fiction canon. So it was just kind of on the outside of things for a very long time, and people didn't know about it. But it did get published, and it's mind-blowing. It's a great novel.
I always like those really rebellious pieces of work. Like, I think a lot of banned books aren't meant to be rebellious. They're just storytelling on issues that are sensitive, whereas this one is like,
this is a guy.
This is a middle finger to your to your
I'm
nation.
going to put my head on the chopping block.
Yeah, like, I'm literally risking my life to write this. Like, that is super ballsy, and like that work deserves to be published. And how dare people try to ban it? You know what I mean? Like, I hear stories like that, and I just get so frustrated that people are like, "Oh, we should ban this book because
Yeah, but remember, these kinds of books were banned because the ideas in them were contrary to the idealisms of the societies that the authors lived in. The powers that be didn't want these kinds of books to be published, because people would say, "Oh, yeah, that's our leaders. That's our president. That's our premier that he's talking about. We're being screwed." And they didn't want people to start thinking that way. So they tried to squash any kind of dangerous ideas like this and make sure that they never saw light of day.
Yeah, we're dealing with that right now with the graphic novel Persepolis.
Oh.
She's actually on the banned book list now, but it's about the revolution in the 80s in Iraq and Iran.
Okay.
The Islamic Revolution. And her whole thing is like talking about transitioning from, this fairly liberal state to like suddenly this very religious and conservative state, and how confusing that was as a 10-year-old. But the whole story, it's like everybody's trying to become like, they're trying to fight to become communist, which in our Western culture is very hard for us to like fathom, but they're trying to get out of this Islamic rule and get into communism, because they're just like, and it's better. It is better than their circumstance, and just the motions this 10-year-old is going through, and like now as an adult, it's super controversial for her to have even written this book. She's not in the country anymore, but to tell her story so brutally honestly is so dangerous for her. Were she to return home, it's just crazy to think about how like this person could die over a book.
Yeah. Like,
it's really astounding, the power of literature and how fearful people can become of those differing ideals from their own. Like, it's fascinating, but it's also like, whoa. That's how this book deserves to exist.
Well, I think it was the 1980s that Salman Rushdie found himself in that same situation, publishing the Satanic Verses. There were people in the Islamic world that wanted to kill him and put a price on his head, and he had to flee and hide out for a while because there were people out looking to kill him for publishing that book. They did not want anybody to be talking about that stuff.
Yeah, it is amazing though it just speaks to the human spirit, how much they believe in this change, and the need for it is so. It's like tragically beautiful.
Yeah.
So that's actually really awesome. I've never heard of that book before. We?
We? Yeah, Yevgeny Zamyatin.
Okay.
It's not super well known, but I have noticed online that a lot of people are starting to talk about it all of a sudden.
Okay.
Probably because of our situation.
Yeah. You never know.
You never know.
Alrighty. You ready for me?
Yep.
Their eyes were watching God.
Never read it, never saw the movie. I just have heard of it, and I know it's supposed to be great.
It's another one that's kind of controversial in the same way that To Kill a Mockingbird is controversial. It's controversial because it does portray the realities of Black lives in the Deep South, between slavery and freedom. This book in particular is from a female Black perspective, but it also is controversial in that it goes the opposite way, where it seems to almost romanticize being an African-American female in the Deep South, with sprinklings of racism in there. So, I mean, this is another book where it's damned if it does and damned if it doesn't. But it is so beautifully written. I resonated with it because it is a female character, and thoughts and feelings, I guess. For how we're all different, humans are very much the same. Like, we do have differences, but there are things of the human psyche that are very resonant. And as a female, she was dealing with a lot of female issues that I resonated with when I had read her work. Zora Neale Hurston is just a very poetic person. She has some amazing poetry. She includes that same kind of poetic verse in here, where she just intersperses it. Her analogies and metaphors are gorgeous and stunning. The hardships that she talks about, she makes them very real. Especially from a female perspective and a female human psyche, especially involving race. This woman's been through a lot, and there's actually another piece of literature that I wanted to read called It Was Far Worse for Women, which is about African American women growing up in the same situation. And this book is another one that's really good at portraying how hard it was to be Black and female in the Deep South, and just conducting normal relationships with other Black men, with other Black women, with white people. Like, they were just treated so differently than from the African American men. And I think this book does a really good job of portraying that hardship, but also the resilience that this woman had in order to endure all of it, and to keep pushing to live and find some kind of life for herself. Just really well done. I can't tell people how amazing this book is. You really have to read it and really, like, delve into it and learn the psyche of the main character in order to really fully appreciate this work. But it is a phenomenal book. I cannot speak more passionately about it. Like, I just don't have words for how passionate I feel about this book. So good.
Okay.
Really great piece of work.
Okay. So I guess it's my turn.
Yeah.
The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne.
Yes! Good one.
Is a banned book.
I love it.
I do too. I read it. I had to read it in high school, and I loved it reading it in high school. I fell in love with it, having to read it. Of course, I had a really good teacher in that class, American Literature, in high school. Liked him a lot. Can't remember his name, but he was a really good guy. Yeah. Anyway, obviously banned because, well... Adultery, and the fact that you could look upon this as being an early feminist work. Even though it was written by a guy, I mean, it's very clear that the woman is the one suffering all the persecution here. She's the one that has to bear the cross. She's the one that has to wear the scarlet letter. The preacher could have gotten off scot-free if he wanted to. His conscience does get the best of him, but nobody faulted him. Nobody was looking at him. Nobody was investigating him. Nobody was even trying to figure out that he was, you know. And he just went and did this and then lied and lied and lied. And she caught hell for it.
And she didn't really do... To be fair, she didn't do anything to, like, really rub it in his face either. Like, she was just trying... Yeah, she was just...
She would have been killed if she would have
done she was just trying to, like... get under the radar and stay alive.
She was trying to survive and do what was best for her daughter.
And in a Puritan culture, no less.
With everybody, she was a total outcast, and nobody wanted anything to do with her.
Yep. And her kid was weird. Little impish child. Yeah. They really describe her interestingly. They almost describe the child as, like, witchy and fairy-like, which I also appreciated. But very ethereal child. Yeah. Interesting. It was a really good book. I liked that one.
It was. And it's another one of those that, okay, yeah, it was banned because it was dealing with themes that are immoral in our society. But it's one of those that we need to face that and accept that we did wrong. and have treated people wrong, and we need to change. We need to open up. Maybe we shouldn't commit adultery, but if it happens, don't put the woman through hell and let the guy get off scot-free.
Yeah.
He should pay too.
It brings up a lot of issues, I think, in Puritan culture and just Christianity in general. Like, take care of the widow and the orphan. Well, technically, according to that culture, an orphan would have been the child of this single mother.
Mm-hmm.
But ironically, the preacher nobody in this assumingly, Christian culture of this community is even listening to the Bible. I think that's what also made it really controversial, is that it was portraying these Christians who were supposed to be really, really good and made them all out to be really evil villains. But it just shows that nobody's perfect. And that, people are still going to be people, and sometimes people are just hateful. And it's not necessarily the religion's fault, it's the society's fault sometimes.
Yeah. But it also, for me, it pointed out a great deal of hypocrisy.
Yes. It was
that
really
does
good at
pervade
that.
our culture. It does pervade our churches. I went to a Catholic church in Kenosha where the people were very proud of the fact that they were big in the church, but they wouldn't give up their seat to an old couple that had no place to sit. And even the head priest, when he was being transferred elsewhere, his last sermon just blasted the congregation for their hypocrisy and the fact that they weren't practicing their religion.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a lot of that, even today, where people are just paying lip service to it, and they are not truly believing what they're sitting and listening to in church.
It's a big
They're
lesson.
going and doing whatever they damn well please and thinking that they're the best because they sit in church every Sunday and participate in the activities and stuff. No, it takes more than that. You don't have to sit in church to be a good person. What it takes to be a good person is to give a damn about your fellow people and do what's right. And you don't have to be in church. You don't even have to believe in God to be that kind of a person.
And
All you have to do is practice it.
Yes, and I think The Scarlet Letter, too, was a really great book on how a person can lose a faith. And how the way people choose, and the mourning process they go to, because this woman had a lot to mourn. She had lost everything because of this disrespect to her religion, which was just a carnal, human, normal mistake. People get pregnant all the time. You know what I mean? Like, it just happens. And we don't know fully the circumstances of the situation. We don't know if she was raped. We don't really know. They don't go in depth to that in this part of the story. So we just know who the dad is. We don't know the circumstances.
Yeah.
So it really is good, though, at showing how the spiritual abuse can cause a person not only to lose their faith, but even lose themselves.
Yeah.
And how much your identity can be wrapped up in that sort of thing, which I think is really important for people to understand, is like a person's personal identity is very contingent on the things they choose to associate themselves with. They have to rebuild their psyche after every time they go through this huge transition of losing their faith, losing their job, losing their, losing a limb even, because it limits their capabilities. There's a huge identity change that has to happen. And that is really damaging to a person. And I think the Scarlet Letter did a really good job of like taking that extreme culture and perpetuating that issue, which I thought was really great. Such a good story.
But once again, that shouldn't be banned. Instead, we should learn.
Exactly. That's the point. Instead of saying, why were they treated like this? We have to say, why did we choose to treat them like this?
Yeah. And why do we choose to act that way today?
Yes. You got to take it back sometimes to yourself and like introspect. I think I'm dealing with that too with a lot of the Black Lives Movement right now. There's a lot of introspection that I think a lot of people are going through about what these issues mean to them. So, connections. But yeah, Scarlet Letter is one of my favorites.
Which is interesting. I just on Saturday I drove through Kenosha and saw some of the devastation of places that were just burned to the ground and places that didn't deserve to be burned. Okay, on the one hand, yeah, terrible that somebody was shot for no reason, but on the other hand, the devastation down there, is that an appropriate response?
We could all speculate till the cows come home.
Yeah,
Honestly.
I don't know. I
So-
wasn't there, but driving through there and seeing that devastation, it's not good for our society. We all have to change, whatever it takes.
Yeah, and we have to be willing to change. I think that's the hardest part. People don't want to be willing to change, either
Yeah.
because racism is such a part of things, or they don't want to see anybody as more special than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So you're just dealing with, nobody wants things to be an exception either, because that means you have to keep making exceptions, and people would rather be miserable than vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that means admitting you're wrong and having to try to go through a process of forgiveness, and none of that's easy.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is no justice and there is no peace unless there's forgiveness
Right.
at the end of the day. So, and that's kind of a theme of the Scarlet Letter as well, is this guy couldn't forgive himself.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't forgive her because he had a lot of anger towards her and the child existing.
Mm-hmm.
That's another theme that goes along with the Scarlet Letter, is that there was this lack of forgiveness to himself and feeling like God couldn't forgive him, to the point where it actually killed him.
Yeah.
Like, he ended up dying because of it. He just couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah.
So it's just really interesting to see those themes all work together. And that's what makes a book a classic, really, is these timeless themes that we can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, shouldn't be banned. That was a phenomenal book.
Yeah.
So good.
So your last one.
My last one, The Giver by
Another
Lois
one I've
Lowry.
never read.
Goodness gracious, you're borrowing this one. You need to at least read this one. The Giver by Lois Lowry is about a utopian dystopia, I guess. Like, it's a society that's posing as a utopian society. They kind of eliminate emotions, and they are kind of Marxist. There's actually a lot of Marxist communities in Israel, I think, that still follow very similar practices to what they talk about in The Giver. But children are raised by everybody in the community. They kind of have, they aren't raised by their parents, per se. They're raised by a primary family, but everybody kind of raises them. You're kind of given a role or task in society when you become old enough, and it's dictated by the community. They're delegated to kids based off of how they're doing in school, how they're working in the community, what their interests are, etc. And one of the kids ends up being the giver. And the giver is a kid who psychically takes on memories of things before this utopian society for the sake of preserving history. And there's only one individual who does this. And the other the individual who passes on this psychic ability is getting ready to be terminated. Which is, basically your deaths are planned in this society. When it can't sustain anymore, individuals' times just come up and you get a ticket and you go and you get incinerated, basically. They put you down. And so the giver is the one who passes on this history of what things used to be like. And as this kid starts experiencing a lot of it's very mundane, everyday stuff. Like experiencing sadness, experiencing joy, extreme emotions is kind of where they start. And then holidays and things like that. Like just these really small moments that people before this society experienced, the giver hangs on to and then passes on. Mm-hmm. So because this kid is experiencing all these extreme emotions and stuff, he starts kind of thinking for himself now, because he realizes the society took so much from us. We're not really living. We're just surviving. So there's this one child that his household is the primary of. And the father is one of the nurturers, and he keeps bringing this child home because it's having issues in its development. And if the child doesn't show promise, this infant doesn't show promise of having normal development, they end up terminating it. And so the kid just starts having so much emotion and empathy towards this infant, and he stops taking the medications that make him lose emotions and things like that, and he rebels, and he basically kidnaps this child and tries to escape the community. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a universal theme of being a free thinker, but also I think what made it controversial was first of all, the planned death and kind of communist Marxist society that is built in here. which actually are still going on today. There are entire communities in various parts of the country where it's not illegal to do Marxism, where they actually do this. They actually live in these communal families and kind of have a group pot, and everybody just kind of has their jobs and works like this. So very controversial, one, because people are against Marxism a lot of the time, and two, because they're for it. You know, so it's another one where it's you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Mm-hmm. But it's also some really adult themes for young adult kids. Like, this is a young adult novel.
Okay.
And you have a protagonist that is a young adult making very adult decisions and trying to, like, basically help this infant escape death and have a chance.
Yeah.
And the rest of the series of this is phenomenal. This is just the first of like 4 books. But it's a really great series. It's fantastic. It's very dystopian. A lot of like sci-fi elements attached to it throughout the series. Some of it's almost magic, but not quite. So it's really interesting how it's almost like this takes place on a different planet.
Okay.
But it's still our planet. You know what I mean? Like, it's just really strange. It's like a whole other probably an alternate universe of our own timeline or our own world, but it's really well done, just well written, and again, not long books. They're very concise, but just really compelling, action-packed storyline.
Cool.
So I loved this one. Highly recommend it for everyone. Read it or die.
Do what she says.
Anyway.
Track you down.
I'll find you. No, it's definitely another book I can't even express how passionate I am about it. It's just a really well done series. I think everybody should have their kids read it. It's good. It's really good. But it's also hard because it's this young kid, again, rebelling against his society and his parents and, you know, all these things to be a free thinker and stand up for what he believes in. So I can see it being very dangerous, but it's a good
what
read.
kid doesn't think that way? You know?
Exactly. And
you don't need a book to teach them to
no, you really don't. But also, I can see people being afraid of the danger of glorifying that as heroism. So I can understand why parents would want to ban this book, but also they're dumb for wanting to. It's just me.
Okay.
So yeah, that's it.
Okay, so that's a big list. A long video for you. I hope that gives you some food for thought and some books to go out and buy and read.
And let us know what some of your favorites are. There's a really long list. You can just Google a list of banned books. There are some fun quizzes on how many banned books of the list you've read. Those are always really fun. I might actually post that one on our Facebook page, so keep an eye out for that one.
That would be cool.
But yeah, really, really interesting. I was amazed at how many banned books I actually had read. And a lot of them were like required reading in school. So I'm like, oh, must not have worked that easily. Yeah, so it's good stuff. There's a lot of actually really great titles on there. So yeah, so like, subscribe, let us know what you think, and we'll see you next time.
So long.
Bye.